With Elden Ring dominating the conversation, it has once again brought up the ever-popular topic of approachability and accessibility in games. And I was planning on doing my piece on player-friendly design, but to remain somewhat topical, for our critical thought, we're going to be once again taking a look at the differences between the two, and why as a developer you need to consider them both if you want your game to succeed on all fronts. Approachability and accessibility are two very important aspects when it comes to making, balancing, and fine-tuning games in today's market. But it's still a topic that a lot of people, even those who are experts in their respective fields, tend to conflate. And make no mistake, there is a difference between accessibility and approachability options in games. And if you don't understand the two, it can lead to muddying the discussion and sometimes making it harder to discuss what it means to improve games along these lines. So let's start with accessibility. Accessibility options in games are ways of making your game or allowing more people to experience your games and removing any issues or barriers of entry. So these are elements such as having colorblind features, UI scaling for people who have vision problems, making sure you have control rebindings, making sure that your game can be played with different controller setups and peripherals, and many more. When it comes to accessibility, these are features that have been peer-reviewed, tested, and have been accepted by communities of people who suffer from disabilities, special interest groups, and more. And sites like the IGDA, Able Gamers, I'm sure there are other ones out there, have a very huge laundry list of essentially just bare functionality or bare essentials that games should have, especially if we're talking about AA and AAA titles, where they have the manpower and resources to put these features in. Now, here's the important thing. Difficulty settings are not an example of accessibility, no matter what anybody says. And the reason why is that accessibility features in games are those that are meant to allow more people to experience a game. They remove hurdles along those lines. Difficulty settings do not change the game itself. And this is one of the major aspects, that accessibility options do not in any way, shape, or form change or impact the core gameplay loop of a title. What that also means is that if your game has pain points and issues to them, having all the accessibility options in the world are not going to change or downplay them. And this is again why I say that both topics of approachability and accessibility are vital to consider. Now, when it comes to accessibility, as I said, there are a lot of examples and there are lists on many sites that you can go down that are universally accepted. Again, UI scaling, colorblind mode, subtitles, and so on. These are things that every game should have. They can help a lot of people and allow more people to experience your games. But the difference, and when we talk about approachability, is that approachability options make your game easier or better to play. They are more targeted towards the core gameplay loop and the UI of your title. And more importantly, the best ones operate on a game-by-game basis. There is no one-size-fits-all approachability list that will make every game work the same way. And that is very important to consider. I'll include a link to this post I wrote about fixing Dark Souls down in the description, but in that piece I talked more about these differences. That when people talk about making Dark Souls more accessible, they oftentimes will conflate that with approachability options. Likewise, people who say that the game is approachable may say that it's also accessible, and that's also not right. When people were complaining about Elden Ring and saying that it doesn't feature things like UI scaling, being able to have audio indications for the various titles or the various options in your menu, that's accessibility. And the thing about the two is that accessibility options, again, they do not improve the experience for everyone. If somebody doesn't suffer from color blindness, colorblind mode doesn't mean a damn thing for them. Same thing goes for subtitles or people who have really, really good vision. Approachability options, however, improve the game for everyone who's playing it, and more importantly, it changes or impacts the UX of your title. In some cases, it may change the systems as well. Some basic examples would be being able to have an auto sort for inventory, making your UI cleaner to understand the differences between, Sword A and Axe C. Having things like progressive difficulty systems, such as in Slay the Spire or Hades, allowing people to fine-tune the difficulty to however they see fit. These are options that can affect a lot of ways of experiencing your game. And this is something that when I spoke with Steven Swan, hopefully I didn't butcher his name too badly there, from Able Gamers, that we spoke about, that it's not about removing gameplay. It's about making it so that everyone can experience it. And this is again where approachability and accessibility will work in different avenues. Again, if you make your game, or you give your game perfect colorblind modes and make it accessible to any controller, that's not going to help if somebody cannot or does not have the reaction time needed to fight a high-speed boss. And one of the points that he said that I think is very poignant here is that for somebody like me, I get a thrill out of fighting a boss at high speeds, playing stuff like Neo, Dark Souls, Devil May Cry, and so on. For somebody who suffers from disabilities or who doesn't have the ability to play the game at that level, they can get that same thrill playing against a boss that is maybe moving at 1/16th of the time, with visual indicators, broadly or proudly above enemies to give them that indication that they need. And again, this is the point about why you need to consider both approachability and accessibility. Because at the end of the day, they both serve a similar goal: to allow more people to experience your game and enjoy your game. And if you don't think about them, or you prioritize one over the other, you're going to end up with an experience that is not going to work as well as it should. Now, with Elden Ring and a lot of the Souls-likes, they are, in a lot of respect, approachable. Elden Ring features a lot of ways of playing the game that allow far more people to experience it than previous Souls-likes. But it may not be the best example of accessibility, with people pointing out a lot of key features that are missing from it. So, with that said, we're going to take a quick break, and when I come back, I want to talk a little bit more about what happens if you mess up on either approachability or accessibility. But before we do that, if you're interested in my thoughts on design, then be sure to check out my latest offering of books. For entry-level students, we have 20 Essential Games to Study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with free-to-play coming in 2022. As I talked about in the last section, that approachability and accessibility are two vitally important aspects of games. And for some developers out there, they may downplay one or the other, and in some cases both, if we're talking about first-time developers and smaller indie games. But in today's market, it is something you need to consider, not only with just how broad the market and the audience is for video games, but also being able to present a title that can be picked up and played by a lot of people. There's a reason why I harp a lot on UX design, because UX design generally makes your game better to play for everyone involved. And the developers who typically succeed or continue to succeed, they will often make their game very approachable. It's very enjoyable to play this game. I know that's a huge shock and a completely out of left field game dev tip. If you make your game enjoyable to play, people will play it. But again, with conflating the two, it can become very hard to distinguish and differentiate what aspects are going to improve your game. As I said in the last part, that difficulty settings are not an example of accessibility. They are one of those kind of on-the-line elements. And what that means is that there are a lot of features that can affect both approachability and accessibility. And here's a very simple example. that anything that we talk about that is accessible is also going to land on the approachability side. But not every approachability option is necessarily going to be an accessibility one. And I know that may just confuse a lot of people there. But again, when you make your game more approachable, you are improving and refining the game systems and the UI and the UX of your title, thereby allowing more people to experience your core gameplay loop. Accessibility removes the barriers of entry that would stop somebody from being able to experience your game right from the onset. So, for developers, if you either ignore either on purpose or just by accident one or both of these, what ends up happening? Well, if you ignore accessibility features, you are, cutting out a potential market of people who want to experience your game. This is one of the reasons why we say that doing stuff like having rapidly pushing QTEs and just, random flashing lights that can occur in your game aren't the most accessible ways of designing a game today. And again, these features were in games heavily in the late 90s and into the 2000s. But as the market has grown up, as it's gotten wider, people are expecting certain bare minimums. And this is what I talk about when we look at lists of things that have been described on able gamers, special interest groups, and so on, as to what are considered accessibility options. In today's market, your game should, at bare minimum, of course, have control rebindings, have volume sliders. Again, these are things that we talk about and we joke when we see them in video games, but for some people, they really do need them, and it's important to have them. UI scaling, again, is one of those things that most people really weren't even thinking about 15, 20 years ago. But when we have games with text this small that you're trying to make out on your big TV or even on your computer monitor, having UI scaling is a really great feature. Does it affect everybody? No. But it can help your game and make it more accessible, thereby having more people play your game and be more interested in the future. So if we ignore approachability, what happens? Ignoring approachability elements is one of the things that leads to games staying and not being able to grow outside of niche fan bases. This is something that, again, From Software has been keeping a very close eye on as they refine their whole Souls-like formula from King's Field to Demon Souls, Dark, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, Sekiro, and so on. That it's about trying to figure out a way of allowing more people to enjoy and experience a game. And also why this is not a cookie cutter list. Because what works in one game obviously is not going to work in another game. Improvements in Mario Odyssey's approachability is not going to affect Doom Eternal all that much. Or Civilizations. Or, pick any other game you can think of there. And this is why it's important to have somebody who understands UX design on your team. And of course, get people to play test the heck out of it. Because this is how you're going to spot pain points. And pain points are one of the big enemies of approachability. Sometimes all it takes to make a game more approachable is changing your tutorial or your first 20 minutes of play. Other times it may require a UI redesign. And these, again, when we talk about approachability, they improve your game across the board. That if somebody can play your game, approachability is going to make your game better. But again, they do not remove or eliminate the barriers of entry that can stop somebody from even starting your game in the first place. That's when we talk about accessibility options. And when we see games succeed that do both, they are giving themselves the greatest possible chance at success and the widest reach of their net in terms of a potential audience. And when you ignore one or both of these, you can still have a game that succeeds. Again, we have seen exceptions to every rule that we have discussed here on the channel and Game Dev Talks. But one of the major aspects of succeeding in this industry is mitigating all the risks, or as many risks as you can, in terms of the hurdles in your game. And leaving in stuff like strobing lights, minuscule UIs, and not having even just the ability to rebind your keys, your game could still succeed. But as we've said before with the Russian roulette analogy, you are putting more bullets in the chamber that can easily end your game if you do that. So, whenever we talk about these topics, I want to get your thoughts on these. What are some accessibility options what do you consider to be 100% standard? Something that if it's not in a game, especially a game being designed today, that the game should be dinged on. And as always, can you think of really brilliant examples of approachability aspects that have been added to a game that you may not have thought about being all that important, but now you just wonder, how did you even play games before it? A good one for me that I always liked is when games have very detailed predictions when it comes to turn-based or tactical games. That I know that if I move my character here and use a spell, I'll know exactly the outcome of that attack, and let things update dynamically as well. So, with all that said, one last point, because I know somebody is going to bring it up. In the last section, I brought up that difficulty sliders are not an example of accessibility. So would they be an example of approachability? And again, I would say yes to a point, because difficulty settings do change the experience of your game. But better examples of difficulty settings are either those that the player can fine-tune, such as in Hades' Way of the Passive Fist, or those that allow you to personally tweak specific aspects, such as, lower stealth difficulty, but maybe we can raise up combat difficulty, and my hands are moving in reverse just because of the reflection in the camera. But again, there are always creative ways of making your game more approachable. And if you can start thinking about your game along those lines and doing that kind of stuff, it will improve not only your own game dev sense, but will make your games more enjoyable to play. So, thank you so much for tuning in to all the liking, subscribing, and commenting that the algorithm tells you to do. Check out our Discord and Patreon link down below, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where he's in the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.